I never thought my senior year of high school would take such a horrifying turn. It all began innocently enough, with a group of friends hanging out like we always did. Alice, Sarah, Emily, and I. Best friends since middle school. We were inseparable, sharing secrets, dreams, and countless laughs. But beneath the surface of our seemingly unbreakable bond, something dark was brewing. It was a chilly autumn evening when things started to unravel. We were gathered at Sarah's house, telling ghost stories as a storm raged outside. The flickering candlelight cast eerie shadows on the walls, enhancing the spooky atmosphere. I noticed an unusual glint in Alice's eyes, a sinister smile curving her lips as she listened to our stories of paranormal encounters. As the night wore on, I began to sense a growing tension among us. Sarah and Emily's conversations became hushed, their eyes darting towards Alice every so often. I could feel that something was amiss, a dreadful secret hanging in the air like a storm cloud. But I couldn't put my finger on it. A few days later, I found myself alone with Emily in the school library. She looked anxious, as if she had something urgent to tell me. Her voice quivered as she leaned in closer, her words barely above a whisper. "Listen," she began. "Alice and Sarah, they're planning something terrible. I overheard them talking in the restroom yesterday. They were discussing ways to get rid of you." My heart raced, and a cold sweat formed on my brow. I struggled to comprehend the gravity of Emily's words. "What do you mean, get rid of me? Like, kill me?" Emily nodded, her eyes wide with fear. "I don't know all the details, but they were talking about making it look like an accident. Poison, maybe, or a staged car crash." My mind spun with disbelief. How could my closest friends be plotting something so heinous? I wanted to confront them, but Emily begged me to stay quiet, fearing they might turn on her if they found out she had spilled their secret. Days turned into a harrowing blur as I tried to act normal around Alice and Sarah. But every smile they gave me, every gesture of friendship, was now tainted by the knowledge of their sinister intentions. I couldn't trust anyone, not even my own reflection in the mirror. One evening, as darkness settled over the town, I received a text message from Sarah. It read, "Meet us at the abandoned warehouse by the river at midnight. We need to talk." My heart pounded in my chest, a mix of terror and curiosity gripping me. Despite my better judgment, I found myself drawn to the warehouse that night. The full moon cast an eerie glow on the dilapidated structure, accentuating its haunting presence. Alice and Sarah were already waiting inside when I cautiously stepped through the creaking doorway. The air was heavy with tension, their faces illuminated by the faint glow of a single flickering bulb. Sarah's lips curled into a smile that didn't reach her eyes, while Alice's gaze bore into me like a predator stalking its prey. "We've been talking," Sarah began, her voice unnervingly calm, "and we think it's time for a change in our group dynamic." My pulse quickened as I tried to maintain my composure. "What do you mean by that?" Alice stepped forward, her voice dripping with malice. "We've realized that you're holding us back. Your insecurities, your need for attention. It's become a burden." I took a step back, my mind racing as I struggled to grasp the gravity of their words. You're going to hurt me?" Sarah's laughter sent chills down my spine. "Oh no, dear. We're not going to hurt you. We're just going to make sure you're out of the picture." Before I could react, Alice lunged at me, a glint of steel in her hand. Instinct kicked in, and I managed to dodge her attack, stumbling backward. Adrenaline surged through my veins as I turned and sprinted toward the exit, their laughter echoing in my ears like a haunting melody. As I burst out of the warehouse and into the moonlit night, I realized that my life would never be the same. My closest friends had become my deadliest enemies, and the safety and normalcy of high school had turned into a nightmarish ordeal. From that night on, I became a shadow, constantly looking over my shoulder, fearing every stranger's face. I couldn't trust anyone, not friends, not family, and the weight of that isolation was crushing. I knew that Alice and Sarah were still out there, plotting, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. So, if you ever find yourself alone at night and you catch a glimpse of dark figures whispering in the shadows, beware, because even the closest bonds can be shattered by the darkest of secrets, and the line between friendship and malevolence can be terrifyingly thin. It was a gloomy autumn morning when it all began. I was a senior at Westbrook High, a seemingly ordinary high school nestled on the outskirts of a quiet town. The halls echoed with the whispers of students, a symphony of laughter, and the shuffling of footsteps. Everything felt normal, at least until that fateful day. I'd always heard rumors about the old school building, stories of its dark history and the tragedies that occurred within its walls. But I never paid much attention to them. After all, it was just talk, right? Little did I know that those whispers held grains of truth that would unravel my reality. One day, during English class, I noticed something peculiar. The teacher, Miss Hawthorne, was writing on the chalkboard, explaining a lesson on literary devices. But as her voice droned on, something caught my eye in the dusty old chalkboard eraser tray. It was a faint, childlike drawing etched in the dust. A girl with hollow eyes and a smile that seemed to stretch impossibly wide. I blinked, thinking my imagination was playing tricks on me. But when I looked again, it was still there. I rubbed my eyes and glanced around the classroom. Everything appeared normal. Students engrossed in their notes. Ms. Hawthorne oblivious to the bizarre drawing. I felt a shiver down my spine, like a cold finger tracing my vertebrae. I discreetly snapped a photo of the drawing, hoping to prove to myself later that it was just my imagination. That night, as I stared at the photo on my phone, I felt an overwhelming sense of unease. The girl in the drawing seemed to be staring back at me, her smile sending a chill deep into my bones. I shook my head, trying to dismiss the irrational fear that was creeping in. But then I noticed something even more unsettling. The date on the chalkboard behind the drawing was from a decade ago, when the old building was still in use. Curiosity gnawing at me, I delved into the school's history. I scoured through old yearbooks and local newspapers, looking for any mention of a girl who matched the drawing. Hours turned into days, and the more I dug, the more I realized that something sinister had taken place in Westbrook High. I found an article from 10 years ago that detailed the mysterious disappearance of a student named Emily Carter. She had been a quiet girl, always seen with her sketchbook, drawing fantastical worlds and eerie creatures. The article mentioned that her disappearance was never solved, and she was eventually declared legally dead after years of fruitless searching. The photo accompanying the article sent chills down my spine. It was her, the girl from the drawing. Determined to unravel the mystery, I began asking around discreetly. Some of the teachers who had been at the school for a long time spoke in hushed tones about strange occurrences, flickering lights, distant laughter, and the feeling of being watched. They avoided the old building's 4th floor, where Emily's classroom had been. One evening, driven by a mix of fascination and dread, I ventured to the 4th floor. The hallway was dimly lit, the air heavy with an otherworldly tension. The classroom door was slightly ajar, creaking as if inviting me inside. My heart pounded and my palms grew clammy, but I couldn't resist the pull. As I stepped into the classroom, a chill enveloped me. The walls were covered in faded drawings, creatures with too many limbs, distorted landscapes, and that same girl, Emily, in various eerie scenarios. It was as if her imagination had seeped into the room, staining it with her otherworldly visions. Suddenly, a whisper echoed in my ears, soft but distinct. "Help me." I spun around, my heart racing, but there was no one there. The feeling of being watched intensified, and a sense of dread consumed me. I wanted to run, but I couldn't move. Then, in the corner of the room, I saw her. A translucent figure with hollow eyes and an impossibly wide smile. It was Emily, her presence radiating anguish and longing. She extended a pale hand towards me, her voice a haunting echo. "Help me." I stumbled backward, my breath catching in my throat. The walls seemed to close in on me, the drawings morphing into grotesque forms. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of voices overlapping in a maddening symphony. I felt as though I was being pulled into an abyss of darkness. In a surge of panic, I bolted from the room, the echoes of Emily's plea ringing in my ears. As I stumbled down the stairs, I glanced back at the fourth-floor window. The room was dark, the drawings hidden from view. I never returned to Westbrook High after that day. The memory of Emily's ghostly presence haunted my dreams, a constant reminder of the inexplicable horrors I had witnessed. I often wonder if she found the peace she sought, or if her restless spirit still roams the fourth floor of that forsaken building, forever trapped between worlds. To this day, I can't shake off the feeling that there are places where the boundary between the living and the dead is thin, where echoes of the forgotten linger, waiting for someone to listen and understand their pain. And as much as I try to convince myself it was just a nightmare, I can never forget the chilling truth that I was a witness to the paranormal, a participant in a horror story that defies all explanation. As the final bell rang, signaling the end of another mundane day at Roosevelt High, I gathered my books and headed down the empty hallway. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting an eerie glow on the scuffed linoleum floor. I could hear the distant echo of lockers slamming shut, but otherwise, the school seemed deserted. I was one of the last students to leave the building that day, as I often stayed late to study in the quiet solitude of the library. As I rounded the corner, I caught sight of Mr. Grady, the aging janitor, pushing his mop bucket down the hallway. His hunched figure seemed to blend into the shadows, his unkempt gray hair falling into his face as he worked. He shot me a fleeting smile, revealing crooked teeth stained by years of coffee and cigarettes. "Evening, Jessica," he rasped, his voice sending shivers down my spine. I nodded in reply, quickening my pace. There was something about Mr. Grady that had always unnerved me, something that made my instincts scream danger. I entered the library, grateful for the refuge it provided from the unsettling encounter. The rows of bookshelves stretched out before me, their contents seemingly untouched by time. I settled at a corner table, losing myself in my textbooks and notes. Minutes turned into hours, and the only sound was the scratching of my pen on paper. Suddenly, a faint creaking noise broke the silence. I looked up, my heart racing. The library's massive windows were frosted over, but I could make out the silhouette of Mr. Grady standing just outside, peering in. I couldn't shake the feeling that his eyes were fixed on me. My hands trembling, I convinced myself it was just my imagination, and returned to my work. Time passed, and the library grew darker as the sun sank beneath the horizon. The fluorescent lights above me flickered sporadically, casting eerie shadows on the walls. I gathered my things, feeling a growing unease. I couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched, and a sinking realization set in. Mr. Grady was still out there. I forced myself to take a deep breath and headed for the library doors. My footsteps echoed loudly in the empty space, and I reached for the doorknob, my heart pounding. As I pulled the door open, a cold gust of wind rushed in, causing me to shiver involuntarily. I stepped onto the front steps, my eyes scanning the empty courtyard. And then, there he was, leaning against a tree, his eyes fixed on me. Panic surged through me, and I quickly descended the steps. My car was parked a few yards away, and I fumbled for my keys, my fingers trembling too much to find the right one. "Jessica," his voice came from behind me, a hoarse whisper that seemed to curl around me. I froze, every muscle in my body tensing. I turned slowly, and there he was, standing at the foot of the steps, his gaze locked onto mine. "What do you want?" I managed to choke out, my voice barely audible. His lips curled into a smile that sent shivers down my spine. "Just wanted to make sure you were safe," he replied, taking a step closer. "You know, this place can be dangerous after dark." I backed away, my heart racing. "I'm fine. I don't need your help." Mr. Grady's smile faded, and his eyes darkened. "You should be careful, Jessica. You never know who might be lurking around." With that ominous warning, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the school building. I stood there for a moment, my breath ragged, my mind reeling. There was something deeply unsettling about his words, something that made my stomach churn. I climbed into my car, my hands still trembling, and locked the doors. As I drove away from the school, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was leaving something behind, something that would haunt my thoughts long after the night was over. Weeks went by, and I couldn't shake the memory of that encounter. I avoided staying late at school, opting to rush home as soon as the final bell rang. But no matter how fast I ran, I couldn't escape the feeling that I was being watched, that Mr. Grady was lurking just out of sight. Then, one evening, as I was leaving a friend's house, I saw him again. He was standing across the street, his gaze fixed on me, that same unsettling smile on his lips. My heart raced, and I quickly ducked into my car, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the keys. I sped away, glancing in the rearview mirror. He was standing there, watching me drive away. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. Mr. Grady wasn't just a creepy janitor. He was a stalker, and I was his target. Terrified, I confided in my parents and the school authorities. They took my concerns seriously, and the police were called in to investigate. As it turned out, Mr. Grady had a history of similar incidents at previous schools he had worked at. They arrested him, and the truth came out. He had been watching me, following me, obsessed with me. The horror of those days still lingers in my mind, the feeling of being constantly watched, the realization that danger can lurk in the most unexpected places. The fear that gripped me during that time has left a lasting mark, a reminder that sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones that look just like us.